this is Julia from the Paintboxletters, and today I am going to be doing a tutorial on the Vanilla Moon. This was painted using exclusively the Vanilla Moon palette from Aloha Studios. So we're just going to use these 4 colors to create a misty night sky with a vanilla moon. So first I am going to go through the materials that I'm using today. You'll need paper, obviously. I'm using 140 pound Arches cold press paper, and I've taped it down on all 4 sides to prevent any buckling or warping of the paper. You don't have to with Arches, but I like to have the clean lines on the sides. I also use an art board, which is white on one side and brown on the other side, to tape my paper down to so that I can move it around if necessary. I only use the dark side because it's easier to see that I'm putting the tape down properly in straight lines. We have the Vanilla Moon set, and you'll need a pencil and eraser. And I will primarily be using these 2 brushes. One is the Princeton Neptune round 6, and the other is a round 2 mimic synthetic squirrel brush from Jerry's Art Aroma. And any size 2 or small tip brush will do. This is for drawing the stars at the end and for any detail work that you would like to do. And then finally, I will be using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White for the stars at the end. Obviously, you'll need water for your paints and also for cleaning your brushes as you work. So let's get started. So the first thing, you'll also need any simple tool sitting around to draw a circle for your moon. So I'm going to use this roll of washi tape that I happen to have sitting right here. And I want to, you could either do it if you wanted it a little smaller on the inside of the circle, but I'm going to do this on the outside. Just draw. I think I just moved it. A little circle for the moon. So I have my moon shape, and I'm actually going to erase it as much as I can so there are no pencil lines in my painting. Enough that I can still see the lines, but okay. So first things first is to wet the entire paper minus the moon. So I'm going to put some water on my paper. And for this step, I'm just using a large brush just to make it easier, a little faster. Another trick that I have discovered, if you tend to paint slowly and you find that the paper, either the paper that you use is very thirsty and your paper dries very quickly, or you just need extra time and you don't want your paper to dry out, one thing you can do before you tape your paper down is to wet the opposite side of the paper. I did not do that for this step or for this painting, but it is a possibility, and it helps keep your paper dry for longer. obviously my brush was not entirely clean. You can see the color. It's a light purple. I think the last thing I painted involved the Vanilla Moon palette and Kaona, which is the really dark purple that's in this palette. So my paper is completely saturated and we can get started. So when it comes to night sky or galaxy style paintings, there are two camps, and some people like to put the lighter color down first, and some people like to put the darker color down first. I like to put my darker color down first. So you're just putting the color down very gently, and then the water that's on your paper is going to do a lot of the work for you when it comes to blending. As you put your color down, you want to avoid putting dark colors right around the edge of the moon, for now at least, because the moon needs to have a little bit of a glow to it. So this is all just one color, just Kaona, and already, just because the paint has it, there's so much variation and range in this one color that it already looks like a misty night sky. So the next color I'm gonna add is King Protea, which is this dusty rose color, and we're adding it the same way, very lightly. On the paper, and you're letting the water do the work for you when it comes to the blending. Okay, so we've put down our first layer of color, and this is only using Kaona and King Protea. So just those two colors. Generally with night sky paintings, in order to get really vivid saturated colors, you need more than one layer. So we're gonna let this layer dry completely before we add another layer of paint to it. So my first layer of paint is completely dry. And as you can probably see, the colors have, they're not as bright as they were when they were wet. So we're going to just repeat what we did with the very first layer of paint and do the exact same thing. So you'll want to re-wet the entire piece. Don't worry about that bottom layer. Be careful because you are inevitably going to lift some of that paint from the first layer, but we want to make sure that the area around the moon stays as light as possible. So we're going to go carefully around that area to not get too much pigment or paint in that area right there. So same thing as before, we're just adding more color, more paint to the painting, trying to kind of stay in with the colors that you used in that general area. So the areas where I used the dark purple, I'll be putting down more dark purple, and again letting the water do the heavy lifting when it comes to the blending of colors. But I do want the colors to be saturated enough that it looks like a night sky. So now is a really fun part of the Vanilla Moon, and that is adding Moonbeam shimmer to the painting. So we're going to load that up on our brush and think of the areas that we really want to shine, which is right around the edges of the moon. So we definitely want to put, and with this part, I'm gently kind of tapping my brush onto the paper to allow as much of the paint to get onto the paper. And again, your paper should still be wet, so the water is doing the work in terms of blending. Your paper should not be soaked, but just enough water that the watercolor pigments can kind of glide through. And I know that this step is difficult to see on camera, but it is really neat to watch it in person how the iridescent shimmer moves across the paper. Now I'm gonna add just a bit of shimmer to a few other areas, some of the lighter areas of the sky. Okay, so the sky portion is done for now. We do need to wait for the painting to dry again completely before we work on the moon. All right, we're back. My painting is completely dry. So the next step is you have one of two options. One is to move forward and work on the moon, and the other is to do your stars before painting the moon, so then you don't have to cover up your moon when you're spraying the stars on. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the stars now. So I use Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white for all of my star needs, and I like the toothbrush method. Honestly, I feel that it depends on the aesthetic. Some people like to load up one paintbrush with a white and then tap their stars on. And that it's a different aesthetic. The stars there aren't as many. The stars are a little bit bigger, and you tend to get white splatter everywhere. On your hands, on your face, all over your workspace. So I really like the look of lots of little stars. So I prefer the paintbrush method, the toothbrush method. And here is what I do. So obviously this toothbrush, it's seen a lot. I wet my toothbrush. So I've just dipped it in clean water. I tap off the excess, and then I just gently press out a little bit of extra water. There needs to be some water on the brush, on the toothbrush, because Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white is very, very thick. And if there's not enough water on your brush, then the stars will be tiny and they won't come off. They won't spray off very well. So I've dipped it in. I'm just gonna take some of that off. And how you can tell if you have enough water is right there in between the bristles. You can see just a tiny bit of water in that space. Or I guess wet bleed proof white. All right, so here we go. So I'm just gonna take this toothbrush and use my thumb and spray. I'm just using my thumb across the bristles, pretty close to the paper to avoid making a giant mess, and spray the stars on. You can really adjust, once you get the hang of it, adjust the size of your stars by the amount of water that you have on your toothbrush. So if you have more water on your brush, your stars will be bigger. So I've just added a bit more water. Okay, so my stars are done. From there, I like to either add, sometimes I add shooting stars, and sometimes I add a couple of small stars that are my twinkling stars. So at this point, I'm going to take the round 2 brush and get just a tiny bit on the tip of my brush. I don't want too much, and I don't want it to be too wet. So at this point, I always test it out to make sure that I don't get a glob of water or paint on my paper. I tend to look at my painting. I like my big twinkling stars to be in areas that are especially dark. So like these are the areas that I would put my big twinkling stars. I look for one that is a little bit on the large side, and then I do a little cross with some tiny little twinkly lines coming out of it. So there's one. I guess I'll do one. I want one right here, but there's no good star to use, so I'm just gonna go for it. And then I'll add a little bit to the center, just some tiny little dots of paint. And then I'll put a shooting star here. So that part is finished. Now we are moving on to the final part of the vanilla moon, which is the moon itself. So right now, every other part of my paper is done. This part is clean. I have not gotten it wet. So now is the time to put down some water. And to get the moon wet. For the moon, I like to use a smaller brush just so I have better control over where the paint goes. You're working in a small space, so I'm going to use my round 2 brush. And the only color that I'll be using in my vanilla moon is vanilla. It is going to do everything for me. So all right. So I don't want too much on my brush, too much paint. And I'm going to work and just dab some color all around my wet moon, and then spread that color out. This is my first layer, and it's just to give the whole moon a little bit of color. That part is done, and I can tell that there is a little too much water on my moon for the next step. So I'm just going to lift some of that water out. Now, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there are 2 little spots here of purple paint that I think got splattered while I was working. So I'm going to use this opportunity to cover that up. I'm just using the very, very tip of my brush and getting a little bit a very saturated color of paint. So I'm putting down a little dab for my moon craters. And you don't want them to look too uniform, so I'm actually going to blend some of these out. Because I put too many in one area. I'm just adding, at this point, some water to dilute them. Now back to my crater making. So and that step is done. So you can either leave it like this, or we can add some mistiness to cover up the moon. So we'll move on to that step. So I've let my entire painting dry. My moon is mostly dry, still a little wet in the center, but we're gonna add a little bit of mistiness around the moon. So for this step, we're primarily going to use King Protea and Moonbeam. We might use a little bit of vanilla, but we're going to avoid using a dark color. So we'll just be using these three. So first step is to, after having just dried everything, is to add some water in the areas you would like to see some misty clouds. This is just water. Okay. And now we're going to put down a little bit of King Protea. We're working in that area that has water. I'm going to add a tiny bit of the vanilla to it. Oop, maybe that was a little more than I wanted. To kind of mute the color a bit. And then finally, I am going to add some Moonbeam to my misty clouds. And that's it. So I'm going to give this a minute to dry, and then we'll do the very satisfying tape peel. All right, everything is dry. So here is my favorite part. And that is peeling off the tape. finished piece. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and hopefully I'll have more tutorials out for you in the future. Come see me at the Paintbox Letters. Bye.